I was living inside a 5 by 10 storage unit, eating cold beans straight from a can, when I found the briefcase that changed everything. My name's Ethan Carver, and just 6 months ago, I had what most men would call a perfect life, a beautiful wife, 2 great kids, and a steady job at Holloway Timber, the biggest lumber company in Redfield, Oregon. Now, I'm sitting here staring at 50 grand in cash and a set of coordinates pointing somewhere in Montana. The note said, "This is just travel money." But what I found when I reached those coordinates made me realize my whole life had been designed, and destroyed, by someone I never suspected. Before I tell you my complete story, subscribe and comment where you're watching from. I'd love to know how far this story travels. You want to know how a man goes from Sunday dinners with his family to sleeping on a cot surrounded by concrete walls? How someone loses his wife to his boss, his kids to lies, and his dignity to a world that stomps on you when you're already down? Let me take you to the start, because the ending isn't what you'd expect. My wife, Laura, always said I trusted people too much. "Ethan," she'd say, stirring her coffee at our kitchen table, "you think everyone's as honest as you are. That'll come back to bite you one day." Funny thing, the person warning me about snakes was the one hiding the fangs. Grant Holloway wasn't just my boss, he was a local legend, the man who owned Holloway Timber, inherited from his father, and the wealth that came with it. He had the charm, the cars, and a reputation for getting what he wanted, including other men's wives. I'd been there 18 years, managing 40 guys while Grant played golf and took credit for everything. My son, Tyler, had just made the varsity football team, 14 years old, all legs and confidence. My daughter, Ellie, 11, brilliant and curious beyond her age. At least, I thought she had 2 loving parents. Turns out she had 1 parent, and 1 actor playing a part for someone else's plan. But here's what no one tells you about losing everything: rock bottom has a strange way of revealing the truth. Sometimes, when everything's taken from you, money, love, reputation, what's left behind isn't emptiness. It's clarity. And sometimes, a crazy old uncle you barely knew doesn't just leave you money, he leaves you the truth. That briefcase I found? It was left by my Uncle Walter before he died, a Vietnam vet everyone thought had gone mad after my father's so-called accident at the mill decades ago. He'd moved to Montana, lived off the grid, and only showed up on Thanksgiving with warnings people laughed off. Turns out when you're right about everything, people call you crazy until the moment they realize you were the only one who ever saw clearly. That storage unit still smelled like old cigarettes and regret. It was February in Oregon, cold enough to see my breath, and I was warming a can of beans over a cheap camping stove I'd bought at a pawn shop, the same place I sold my wedding ring for $40. That ring had cost me $2,000. The marriage cost me everything. But when I held that cash in my hands and read Uncle Walter's note about my father's death not being an accident, something inside me shifted. Laura had texted me once, "You'll die poor and alone." She was wrong about both. The old me did die that night, the trusting fool who believed love and loyalty were enough. He died in a storage unit holding $50,000 in cash and a letter that said everything he'd ever believed was a lie. The coordinates Walter left pointed to somewhere deep in Montana, 1,000 miles from everything I'd lost, from the home that no longer felt like mine, from the wife who'd betrayed me, and from the boss who'd enjoyed watching me break. But I had to know the truth, about my father's death, about the woman I'd built a family with, and about why everything in my life seemed to lead back to one man, Grant Holloway. Redfield, Oregon sits about 40 miles south of Portland, one of those towns where everyone knows everyone's business before it happens. Population 12,000, maybe 13 if you count the college kids. The whole place revolved around Holloway Timber, like a body around its spine. The mill whistle blew at 7 a.m., noon, and 5 p.m. You could set your watch by it, and most folks did. I'd heard that whistle my whole life. First as a kid when my dad worked the saw lines, then as a teenager sweeping floors for extra cash, and later as a man running the entire floor crew. 18 years I gave to that place, started loading trucks at 24, promoted to supervisor by 35. You never really get the smell of sawdust out of your clothes. But I wore it like cologne, proof of honest work. Laura used to say that smell reminded her of home. She'd bury her face in my work shirt, whispering, "You smell like wood and rain." That was back when we still had something real. When she was Laura Kent, cheer captain with honey blonde hair and that laugh that could turn heads from a mile away. And me? Just the mill guy with grease on his hands and a pickup that coughed every time I turned the key. We got married right out of high school, had our reception at the VFW hall, potluck style, beer in red cups, and my Uncle Walter giving one of his strange toasts about wolves in sheep's clothing. Everyone laughed it off, said the old vet had lost his mind. Turns out, he might have been the only one in that room who knew the truth. Our house on Maple Drive wasn't much, 3 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that hadn't been updated since the 80s. Laura painted everything beige until she saw a picture of a yellow farmhouse in a magazine. "Let's paint the kitchen this color," she said, "so the sun feels like it's smiling at us." And for years, it did. Every morning, I'd drink coffee in that yellow kitchen, watching her pack lunches while sunlight danced on her hair. Simple. Peaceful. Then came the slow, invisible rot. It started with new clothes we couldn't afford. Then complaints about our house being too small. Then comments about how Grant Holloway had invited her to some company dinner, for networking, she'd said. I thought she was helping me get ahead. Now I know she was helping someone else destroy me. The day everything collapsed started like any other Thursday. My foreman, Pete, noticed I looked pale. "Boss, you okay? You look like a ghost that forgot to clock out." I brushed him off, said it was just the flu. By noon, I was dizzy, sweating, stomach churning like acid. I climbed into my truck, just wanting my bed. 12 minutes home, I counted every one. When I turned onto Maple Drive, I saw it, Grant's black Mercedes parked right in my driveway. That sleek, smug car cost more than 2 years of my salary. I thought maybe something happened at the mill, maybe an accident, maybe he came to talk to me. I parked on the curb, walked up to my own front door. Locked. We never locked it during the day. Then I heard it, Laura's laugh from upstairs. Not her polite laugh. Not her movie night laugh. The one that used to belong only to me. The smart thing would have been to walk away. But smart went right out the window. I climbed the stairs, passing family photos, Tyler in his football jersey, Ellie in her dance recital outfit, our wedding photo smiling down like a lie. The door to our bedroom was half open. Grant was sitting on my side of the bed, buttoning his shirt. Laura was in a silk robe I'd never seen before. They were talking about Paris. A restaurant with a view of the Eiffel Tower. Like they weren't shattering 16 years of marriage in the bed where my children were conceived. "Hello, Grant," I said. You should have seen his face. For once, the great Grant Holloway had no words. He just grabbed his jacket, muttered something about discussing it at work, and left. Laura didn't even flinch. She sat at her vanity, brushing her hair, slow, mechanical, emotionless. "How long?" I asked. She didn't stop brushing. "Does it matter? Our kids sleep in this house," I said. "My kids." She turned, her eyes colder than winter. "Your kids? You think Tyler wants to end up like you? Covered in sawdust for the rest of his life?" Every word cut deeper than the last. "Grant's showing me what life could be," she said. "He's taking me to Europe next month. He's buying me a condo downtown." Then she looked at me, really looked, like I was something she'd outgrown. "Ethan, you're 42. You've peaked. You think being a mill supervisor is your legacy?" I told her I dreamed of raising a family, of loving her. She laughed. "The woman you loved never existed." The next morning, I went to work like nothing had happened. By noon, Grant's assistant called me to his office. Grant sat behind his father's old walnut desk. He didn't even look up. "We're downsizing," he said. "Your position's been eliminated." 18 years, gone in one sentence. Security escorted me out. By dinner time, everyone in Redfield knew. The divorce papers came a week later. Laura had the best lawyer money could buy, funded, I later learned, by Grant Holloway himself. She wanted the house, the kids, alimony, child support, from a man with no job. And somehow, the judge, a man whose campaign Grant had bankrolled, ruled in her favor. That's how I ended up in a storage unit on the edge of town. $89 a month, paid with borrowed money. The night guard, Carl, pretended not to see me sneaking in after closing. I set up a cot against one wall, used my father's old tool chest as a table, and a battery lantern for light. Showered at the Planet Fitness down the road for $10 a month. You'd be amazed how fast a man adapts when there's no other choice. 3 weeks in, I started sorting through the boxes Laura had thrown in during the divorce, things she didn't want but knew I cared about. Photos. My dad's old war medals. Christmas ornaments. That's when I saw it, a brown leather briefcase wedged behind the boxes. Covered in dust. The luggage tag had my name, written in Uncle Walter's shaky handwriting. But Walter had been dead 8 months. I tried every combo I could think of, birthdays, anniversaries, nothing. Finally, I took a screwdriver and broke the lock. It popped open with a sound like a gunshot. Inside, neat stacks of $100 bills, banded by the bank. I counted 3 times before believing it. $50,000 in cash. But it wasn't the money that made my hands shake. It was the letter on yellow paper, in Walter's handwriting. "Ethan, if you're reading this, you've lost everything. Good. A man can't rebuild until he's cleared the wreckage. This isn't charity. It's fuel for what comes next. Drive to these coordinates in Montana. Park at the red gate. Walk north 1 mile until you find the boulder that looks like a bear's head. Behind it, you'll find the truth about your father's death." He went on. "Your father didn't die in an accident. He was murdered by Grant's father, because he refused to sell his mineral rights. Those rights are worth millions, and they're yours. I've spent 40 years collecting proof, but cancer's got me now. Make them pay. And don't trust anyone, especially family. Sometimes, the lowest point is where you finally see the stars." I read that letter 6 times. Each word rewired something in my brain. My father, murdered. Grant's family, behind it. Laura, part of it. The pieces were there. I just hadn't seen the pattern yet. The coordinates pointed somewhere near Glacier National Park, deep in the Montana wilderness. I sat on that cot, the letter trembling in my hands, staring at the neat stacks of $100 bills. $50,000. Enough to start over. Enough to get an apartment, maybe a lawyer, maybe even a second chance with my kids. But the words in Uncle Walter's note kept echoing in my mind. Behind that boulder is the truth about your father's death. How could I walk away from that? That night, I barely slept. When the sun rose, I drove to a used car lot off Route 20 and bought a 2006 Ford F-150 for $8,000 cash. The dealer didn't ask questions, and I didn't offer any. I loaded it with camping gear, water, canned food, and a cheap map of Montana. Before I left Redfield, I drove one last time past the house on Maple Drive. Tyler's bike leaned against the garage. Ellie's curtains were new, purple now instead of the pink we'd picked together. Laura's car was gone, probably parked outside Grant's condo in downtown Portland. My life was moving on without me. It was like watching a movie where I'd been edited out of every frame. 3 days. That's how long it took to reach Montana. 18 hours of driving, broken up by cheap motel stays and gas station food that barely passed for a meal. Each mile between me and Oregon made me feel lighter, like I was shedding a skin that had grown too tight. By the time I hit Flathead County, the roads had turned from paved to gravel to barely their dirt trails. The GPS gave up halfway, flashing signal lost like even satellites didn't dare follow me where I was going. At last, I saw it, the red gate Walter had described. Except now it was mostly rust, hanging crooked on one hinge. A heavy chain and an old padlock blocked the path. I tried the key Walter had given me at Thanksgiving a year ago. It turned easily, like it had been waiting for me. Beyond the gate, the path vanished into thick pines. I parked the truck, grabbed my backpack, and started walking north. Every step crunched against frozen leaves. The silence of that forest was heavy, the kind of quiet that presses against your chest. After about a mile, I saw it, a massive boulder shaped like a bear's head, just like he said. It stood in a clearing where the sun broke through the trees. Behind it, hidden by overgrown brush, was a faint trail. I followed it for another 100 yards before I saw something that stopped me cold. A cabin. Not a hunter's shack. Not a hermit's shelter. This place looked modern, solar panels, a satellite dish, and a generator quietly humming beside the shed. It felt deliberate. Purpose-built. And somehow, I knew Walter had built it for me. The steel door opened with another key from his ring. The air inside was cool, metallic, untouched. There was no dust, no cobwebs, no smell of decay. Just the faint hum of electricity and the distant ticking of an old clock. On one wall hung a massive bulletin board covered in photos, documents, and maps. Some yellowed with age, some printed just years ago. Names, dates, and places were pinned together by red thread, weaving a web of connections. Front and center, a picture of my father, Daniel Carver, smiling beside a younger Grant Holloway Sr., both shaking hands at the lumber mill. Underneath it, a note in Walter's handwriting. Partnership Agreement, 1976, Daniel and Holloway as equals. My breath caught. My father hadn't just worked at the mill. He'd owned part of it. I found a file labeled Maintenance Logs, 1982. That was the year he died. The file showed the loader that crushed him had been serviced the day before the accident, signed off by Holloway's foreman. Insurance records showed a massive payout to the company. And in the margin, Walter had scrawled, "Sabotage, not accident." But that wasn't the worst of it. In a folder marked LK were photographs that made my stomach twist. Laura, at 16, standing beside Grant Holloway, who would have been nearly 40 then. Another photo, a few years later, at a Holloway timber picnic. Then one from our wedding, the same man, in the crowd, smiling. Next to the folder was a bank record, a trust account in Laura's maiden name, opened when she was 17, with regular deposits from a Holloway timber subsidiary. It hit me like a sledgehammer. Laura hadn't just betrayed me, she'd been placed in my life. My hands shook as I opened a small metal case labeled audio logs. Dozens of cassette tapes, each marked with a date. I picked one at random, slid it into a player on the desk, and pressed play. Uncle Walter's voice, gravelly and tired, filled the room. Following LK to meeting with GH at Riverside Motel. She's getting restless. Says he wants to move faster. Then I heard her voice. Laura. Clear as day. He's starting to suspect me. How much longer do I have to play housewife? Then Grant's voice. Until he breaks. We need him discredited, not divorced. Once he loses everything, we take the mineral rights clean. I froze. I wanted to vomit. 16 years of my life, a lie. Every kiss, every touch, every word, scripted by greed. And then another tape, from just last year. Laura again, her tone cold. I've been married to him 16 years, Grant. I've had his children. I've played perfect long enough. Those kids are your leverage, Grant replied. He'll never fight back with them in the picture. Once he's broken, the mineral rights revert to you. I stopped the tape. My knees gave out. I fell against the desk, staring at the walls, the evidence, the timelines, the lies. It all made sense now. Walter hadn't gone crazy. He'd spent 40 years collecting proof that my father was murdered, and that the people who did it had planted my wife in my life to finish the job. On the desk was one last envelope, thicker than the others. Inside, legal documents transferring Walter's entire estate to me. Bank accounts, land titles, and a single statement showing a valuation of $8 million in mineral rights. But there was more, a thumb drive labeled Final Message. I plugged it into the old computer, and the screen flickered to life. Walter's face appeared, frail, gaunt, but sharp-eyed. Ethan, he said, voice trembling but strong. If you're watching this, I didn't make it. You've lost everything, which means they think they've won. That's good. Because now, they're not watching. The money's yours, clean, legal. But what you do next is your choice. You can disappear, or finish what your father started. Either way, they lose. I sat there for a long time after the video ended. The truth had weight, heavy, crushing, liberating. I wasn't just some broken man in a storage unit anymore. I was my father's son. And I finally knew what had to be done. I stayed in that cabin for 3 days, eating canned soup, sleeping on a cot, and reading through decades of documents until my eyes burned. Every drawer I opened, every photograph I studied, pulled me deeper into a truth so enormous it made my past life feel like fiction. Uncle Walter hadn't just gathered evidence, he'd built a legal arsenal. Folders labeled environmental violations, bribery, tax evasion, campaign corruption. Every one of them linked to Holloway Timber and the powerful people protecting it. Judge Harrison, the same one who'd ruled in Laura's favor during the divorce, had his name circled 3 times in red ink with $20,000 campaign donation scribbled beside it. The web went far beyond Redfield. There were state officials, inspectors, bankers, all tied to the Holloway empire. And right at the center of it, Grant Holloway. But Walter hadn't stopped with proof of corruption, he'd left something bigger. A file labeled The Rights detailed a 1976 partnership contract between my father and Grant's father. It stated clearly that both men held equal shares in the mineral rights under the mill property, rights that, according to modern appraisals, were now worth over $80 million. My father's half should have passed to me the day he died. Except, as Walter proved, his death wasn't an accident. The maintenance logs he'd found showed tampered safety controls on the machine that killed my father. A witness statement from a long-dead employee described seeing Holloway Sr. arguing with my father just hours before this accident. Insurance payouts, secret transfers, and falsified records all pointed to one thing: murder, disguised as workplace tragedy. And the final insult? They'd placed Laura in my life to secure control of those mineral rights once I signed them away in marriage. She'd been groomed since she was 16. My entire life, my love, my children, my downfall, had been planned by the same family that killed my father. I stared at the wall of evidence until I couldn't see straight. Anger, grief, disbelief, they all mixed together until only one feeling remained: resolve. Uncle Walter's final video had given me a choice: disappear or fight. Running wasn't an option anymore. So, I packed every file, every tape, every document into plastic bins, loaded them into the F-150, and left the cabin behind. The drive back to Oregon felt different. When I'd first left, I was running from pain. Now, I was chasing justice. My first stop was the FBI field office in Portland. I walked in wearing the same flannel shirt I'd been living in, holding a folder labeled Holloway Industries, Murder and Fraud Evidence. The receptionist asked what it was about. I said, 40 years of lies. They brought me to Agent Patricia Knoll, who listened politely for the first 5 minutes, until I dropped the folder on her desk and showed her the proof. Photos, contracts, bank transfers, tapes. Her professional mask slipped. She called in 2 more agents, then a supervisor. By the end of the hour, the room was buzzing like a hornet's nest. For the next 4 months, I lived quietly in a cheap apartment under legal protection. The FBI built their case piece by piece, running forensic audits, tracing money trails, calling witnesses who thought the past was buried forever. Then came the morning it all fell apart for them.